Before Belgium colonized Rwanda, it was a hierarchical kingdom. Hutu and Tutsi people led similar lives. Many Hutu, who made up 84% of the population, owned cattle. Tutsis, who made up 14%, worked in agriculture. Belgians placed demands on Hutu regarding these resources, creating distinctions between the two. In the 1930s, ID cards were issued to Rwandans that stated ethnicity. Tutsi were favored by colonizers who wanted to preserve Rwandan tradition. According to their interpretation, the Tutsis ruled the Hutu. In 1957, the Hutu Manifestation was issued by a group of activists to end inequalities. By 1959, the Rwandan Revolution occurred, supported by Belgians, and 300,000 Tutsi left Rwanda. In 1962, Belgium granted Rwanda independence, and a Hutu majority government ruled the country. Tutsis were discriminated against, as Hutu extremists blamed them for many of the country's issues. By the end of the 1980s, many Rwandans took refuge in neighboring countries, such as Burundi. In 1990, there was a civil war in the country. Tutsi rebel group, the Rwandan Patriot Front, invaded Rwanda. Extremist Hutus began to make plans to assassinate many Hutu and Tutsi leaders. This war ended in 1993, when the Arusha Accord was signed. An attack to a plane on April 6, 1994, resulted in the deaths of the presidents of Burundi and Rwanda. The next day, Hutu extremists used media sources to send messages to other Hutu, stating that the Tutsi were planning a killing spree against them. Hutu political leaders ordered weapons and distributed them to militias. The Hutu-dominated government labeled all Tutsi in the country as enemies of the state, and the genocide of the Tutsi people was set into motion. Juvenal Habyarimana, a Hutu, reigned as president of Rwanda from 1973 until his death in 1994. Under his regime, ethnocentrism, discrimination, and the Hutu power ideology reigned, with the Tutsi being outright discriminated against by the hands of a small fraction of insiders called the Akazu, consisting of Habyarimana's wife and family and close associates. On top of mandating that Tutsi be stripped of their political and social hierarchy, the Akazu joined extremist army officers to form the Amaso Death Squad within Rwanda, and spread anti-Tutsi propaganda through the extremist radio station RTLM. Through this station, anti-Tutsi ideology ran rampant, dehumanizing Tutsi and even describing ways in which they could be eliminated, laying the groundwork for the intended genocide. The Rwandan Patriotic Front can also be considered as an instigating group to the genocide, as their presence scared almost 300,000 Rwandans into internal settlement camps, causing the government to push anti-Tutsi propaganda further as a means of stopping the Hutu division. Although their invasion was stopped, the Arusha peace agreements that resulted from their tirade called for a change in the government in terms of ruling, as it would include the RPF. This angered Hutu extremists, as it undermined all of the previous enforced Hutu ethnocentrism. In a wider sense, the Catholic and Anglican hierarchies, the French government, and the United Nations may be considered instigators to the genocide, as their positions within Rwanda may have aided in preventing it. The church leaders could have used their uniquely moral position to quell the violence by denouncing the actions based on ethnicity and human rights violations. The French government could have used their political and military influence within the Rwandan government to stop further violence based on the same violations. The United Nations could have used mission UNAMIR troops that came to evacuate foreign nationals to protect innocent Rwandans. Instead, they did nothing, which only allowed Hutu extremists that they were unstoppable in their violent escapades, allowing a genocide that could have been prevented. Although these suggestions for prevention never materialized, there have been many documented cases of rescue and resistance. These individuals contributed immensely in preserving the remaining 20% of the original Tutsi population. In research conducted by Conway, religious convictions seemed to be the most prevalent source of motivation. Rescuers were mainly of Christian or Muslim faith. This is not stating that there were not perpetrators from these religious groups as well. Father Mario Falcone is a Catholic priest who encouraged endangered Tutsis to gather in his church, where he hid them. He alone saved more than 3,000 Tutsis. A government soldier named Silas, who saved many Tutsis in the town of Nyamata by gathering terrified Tutsis and guiding them through wooded areas during the night to safe refuge in a camp in Burundi. The most famous documented stories of heroism would be that of Canadian General Romeo Dallaire and Paul Rusesabagina. Romeo Dallaire was the commander of the United Nations peacekeeping mission deployed to Rwanda. He sent vital information predicting the start of the genocide months before it started to the UN in New York, although the warnings were ignored. During the genocide, General Dallaire was able to provide refuge for thousands of threatened Rwandans with very little support from the UN and the international community. Paul Rusesabagina has been given the title of the Oscar Schindler of Africa. He hid and sheltered 1,200 Tutsis and moderate Hutus within the hotel he managed in Kigali. These individuals mentioned are just a small handful of the people who have provided thousands of endangered Tutsis the opportunity to share their story of survival with future generations. Survivors of the Rwandan genocide endured many horrific events, not limited to torture, rape, injury, destruction of property, and the witnessing of mass murders. Understandably, the prevalence of probable post-traumatic stress disorder and severe depression are quite high as a result, 68% and 94% respectively. It is believed by researchers Denise Sandol and Carl Auerbach that wartime rape is used to destroy a person's identity and sever their significant social ties. According to Sandol and Auerbach, it is estimated that between 250,000 to 500,000 Rwandan women of all ages were subject to sexual violence, including gang rape, sexual slavery, and rape with weapons or sticks, mutilation of reproductive body parts, and intentional transmission of HIV or AIDS. This study conducted interviews of women who had been victims of wartime rape. Of these, 100% of the women bore children. This is not to say other women did not miscarry or abort their pregnancies, simply that all of the participants birthed children. 70% of these children birthed did not know they were children of wartime rape, nor did they know their biological fathers, while 40% of these women contracted HIV or AIDS as a result of wartime rape. Survivors also have an additional challenge as they remember their lost loved ones. They may also remember the violent atrocities that occurred and resulted in the death of their loved ones, such as physical, sexual, and psychological abuse in various forms, such as beatings or torture, as well as mutilation of body parts. As survivors remember their deceased loved ones, thoughts of what happened to themselves may also resurface, similar images and traumas re-experienced. To help with this ongoing psychological trauma, the government had taken multiple steps to provide justice and reparation between the Tutsis and the Hutu. After the genocide, the Rwandan courts had shut down for close to 2 years, but more than 125,000 arrests had been made by 1997. Without any trials, the Rwandan government released hundreds of convicts because of overcrowding in jails. Due to this, 2 more court systems were created, the Gacaca system and the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. ICTR was held in Tanzania by the UN and created suspicion amongst Rwandans because it was hard to get to Tanzania for the trial, and initially the courts were in English and French, which led to feelings of disassociation amongst Rwandans. The Gacaca courts, on the other hand, were an updated version of traditional systems to resolve community conflicts. In the past, people discussed conflicts in front of the village, and they were resolved with an apology and compensation. Judges in the Gacaca courts had no legal experience or education when dealing with sensitive matters like a genocide. Many perpetrators confessed to a crime they hadn't committed because of angry community members. Geetanjali Mukherjee has said that Gacaca courts have actually succeeded in increasing community unity and has safely rehabilitated many perpetrators despite this. Rwanda has worked towards justice from a judicial standpoint, but truth and reconciliation on a personal and political level is important to prevent future genocides. Personal reconciliation took place between the perpetrator and the victim, and it was kept private because the parties involved did not want an outsider coming in to talk about a matter that was extremely personal and sensitive. But traditionally, reconciliation occurred between 2 people who were connected in some way before the harm was done. But in these cases, there is not usually a prior relationship to fall back on. Political reconciliation is reconciliation between 2 complete populations. The groups get together to collectively create public moral decisions. Some reasons why political reconciliation is a benefit is because it reduces the chances of future acts of genocide and increases mental accountability of the act committed. Perpetrators stop seeing themselves as victims and stop blaming the victims for what happened. Holding perpetrators accountable has shown to increase the probability of facilitating reconciliation, and this is an area we should focus our future efforts on.